In a historic nationwide referendum, nearly 52% of the British voters chose to leave the European Union. Both the UK and the EU are now entering uncharted territories. For the first time in history, the EU will lose a member. Evidently, this will trigger a chain of events for the European bloc as well as for the United Kingdom and far beyond. In this report, we will explain the outcome of the Brexit. My name is Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. For more information on the channel, please visit our Patreon page. The Brexit referendum will be followed by negotiations between London and Brussels. A new framework of relations between the UK and the EU will have to be worked out. Matters such as freedom of movement of people, goods and services will have to be settled. Furthermore, any agreement between the UK and the EU will have to be ratified by the EU member states as well as the European and British parliaments. The whole process could take up to 2 years to complete. In the meantime, the UK will still remain a full member of the EU. Once a final deal is reached, the UK will have to invoke Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. What's more is that the European Parliament could actually reject the British withdrawal agreement, and this would only postpone the British exit. For example, some countries such as Germany, Ireland, Belgium and the Netherlands would want to quickly settle the British exit to minimize any financial instability. However, France would want to make things more complicated to send a diplomatic message to other Eurosceptic parties both at home and abroad. Yet the most immediate consequence of the Brexit referendum will be financial. As confidence in the pound will decrease, the value of the currency will fall. Following this, inflation will rise. Already the pound has dropped 10% against the dollar. This is just a taste of what's to come. Fluctuating rates will hit stock exchanges throughout the world, especially in East and South Asia. The European Central Bank and the Bank of England will try to minimize the damage by providing liquidity to banks. As usual in these kind of situations, the central bank will try to cut interest rates, but this will hurt the pound even more. For now, the most likely outcome is that the UK falls into a recession. In fact, according to the British Treasury, the economy will contract by 3 to 6% in the 2 years the UK negotiates its exit terms. It's not just the UK that will feel the fallout. The 2 years of uncertain terms will restrain places where the pound is a favorite currency. The central banks of India, Japan and China have already issued warnings of a financial fallout within those 2 years. Another immediate consequence of the British exit concerns the common market of the EU. An estimated 45% of British exports goes to EU countries and 53% of its imports comes from the bloc. Thus, it will be essential for the UK to reach a new free trade agreement with the European Union. However, free trade agreements are extremely complicated. For example, it took South Korea almost a decade to reach a free trade agreement with the European Union in 2009. That's the kind of lengthy procedures we're looking at. And without a trade agreement, exports and imports would be subject to tariffs as set by the World Trade Organization. For example, the price of a bottle of French wine would increase by about 30%. That's bad for both the French winemaker as well as the British retailer and consumer. So if there are so many negative consequences of the Brexit, what exactly motivated millions of Britons to reject the EU? Well, there are many underlying reasons ranging from weak EU monetary policies to the democratic deficiencies in Brussels. However, perhaps the most decisive factor was the refugee crisis and immigration policy. As immigration has skyrocketed in the UK, the freedom of movement of people was an important concern for voters. Nearly half of all immigrants entered the UK under the EU's freedom of movement law. In the UK, immigration has come to stand for something more than just immigration itself. Many British citizens feel that they are no longer in charge of their own country. Accordingly, political parties that rejected the EU promised better immigration regulations and more prosperous economic prospects. Yet, these two issues are actually blended together. If you want to access the EU market, you have to accept the freedom of movement. You may reject this, but that also means the expulsion from the EU market. So in its basic terms, the referendum was really a choice between decreasing immigration and increasing wealth. For now, London has sacrificed its prosperity for the sake of controlled immigration. However, the subsequent challenge will fall upon the next Prime Minister. He or she will have to disappoint the people who rejected the EU. Unlike the promises of a vibrant 21st century economy, Brexit will not achieve this. Quite the contrary. The next Prime Minister will face widespread resentment as he will have to explain the dire economic conditions. A less prosperous economy means fewer jobs and lower tax receipts, which will lead to more austerity. Discontent among the British public towards the national government will only grow in the coming years. But the UK is not the only one who will feel the consequences of the Brexit. The referendum will set off a chain reaction fueled by Eurosceptic political parties across the European Union. For example, in France, one of the founding members of the EU, the approval rates of the EU have dropped to an all-time low, even lower than in Great Britain. In Greece, the population is still upset with the German-imposed austerity regulations, and the ongoing pension reforms are already creating a constrained situation. Poland will have to work out a deal concerning the status of Polish citizens in the UK. An estimated 1 million Poles have migrated to the UK since 2004. Hungary will also face a tense situation where nationalist political parties blame Brussels for imposing ultra-liberal values such as gay marriage and multiculturalism. In Sweden, Denmark and the Netherlands, right-wing political parties will use the Brexit momentum and immigration policy to introduce their own respective exit referendums. Scotland is a particular case because the majority of the people, about 62%, voted to remain. Some members of the ruling Scottish National Party are already calling for an independence referendum when the UK leaves the EU. Thus, in all likelihood, Brexit will revive the independence demands in Scotland. In essence, Eurosceptic and right-wing nationalist parties will attempt to exploit the situation concerning Brexit by populist means. Ultimately, though, the EU as an institution has helped keep the peace in Europe for half a century. That era is now slowly coming to an end. In a previous Caspian report dating back to 2011, we argued that the European Union would in time effectively cease to exist due to its conflicting cultural, geographic and strategic differences. It remains to be seen whether the EU will formally cease to exist or become so unmanageable that it will lose its relevance. Either way, the Brexit will result in a more fragile and divided Europe. In the long term, instead of one cohesive union, we will see the formation of smaller unions within Europe. These smaller unions will be established along the lines of security, trade and geography. For example, if the EU were to end, the Nordic Council would fill the vacuum in Scandinavia, as Denmark, Sweden, Norway and Finland would form their own bloc. In Eastern Europe, the Visegrad Group would serve as a new regional bloc to counter the local security concerns in regards to Russia. Some countries such as Spain, Italy and Greece would be isolated due to their geographic and financial difficulties. In Western Europe, the core EU members, which includes Germany, France and the Benelux, would strive to form a separate economic union. As for London, Britain is an island nation, and its geopolitical interests require it to be somewhere between Europe and North America, but not firmly bound to either one. The British exit will be financially painful, but it will subside. Once it passes, the UK will be able to maximize its geopolitical position. All of these mentioned events will move at different speeds. What it shows is that the UK is entering uncharted territories, and its impact will be felt far beyond its own borders. This was a Caspian report by me, Shirvan. Special thanks to the following people for their contributions on Patreon. Caspian Report is a one-man operation. You can help with the costs of the show by supporting us on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Caspian Report for more information. Plus, don't forget to share the video and leave your comments. Anyway, thank you for watching. Take care and Sarol.